one of your first projects was a video game called Blastar.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Tell us about Blastar.
Well, I always loved video games when I was a kid and computers. So the video games back then were extremely primitive, you know. So I guess when I was about, I don't know, 10 or so, I saw like the first computer. I mean, I read a lot of books, and then I saw that you could actually have a computer, which is, I thought, wow, this is the best thing ever. It was a Commodore VIC-20. I think it had like 8K of RAM or something. You know?
8K.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was best. I thought it was the best thing ever. And so I got a book on programming, taught myself how to write computer programs. And then gradually progressed from the Commodore VIC-20 to the Sinclair Spectrum, which was actually a pretty brilliant little computer. That was a 48K computer that felt very advanced after the VIC-20. And then so I was just kind of programming, and you couldn't really get very many games. So I was like, well, I'll program games, play them myself. But it is interesting that the simple game that I wrote when I was a kid, and I think I wrote it when I was like 11 or something. And I did all the graphics and the music and everything. So primitive graphics, primitive music, but still. I was actually, I sold the game for money, which wasn't that much money, but it was a lot for a little kid. And I wrote a bunch of other games too when I was a kid, and then actually I worked briefly at a software company, a games company called Rocket Science in Palo Alto, which had nothing to do with rockets. It was just a games company. And then I don't know. I wrote software for almost 20 years, from like ages roughly 10 to 30.
And I heard you used to play Quake a lot.
Yeah,
and got pretty darn good at that.
Yeah. So, played a lot of Quake, and had one of the best teams in the country, actually. And I think it was the first paid esports thing in the US, or certainly one of the first. And we ended up coming second in that. We were actually coming first, but then the best. I was the second best person on the team. The best person on the team, his computer crashed halfway through the game, so we ended up coming second. But I think like we made a few $1,000s or something. So it was pretty good at Quake back in the day.
Yeah. And I heard you wanted to get into, or at least you thought about getting into programming video games, but then is that fair to say?
I did actually work on some fairly advanced video games at this company, Rocket Science.
Okay.
But that's I like video games, but I wanted to sort of have as big of impact on the world as possible. Like I said, like try to take the set of actions that I think are most likely to result in a good future, be as useful as possible. So I was, for a while there, was pursuing a path of developing technology for electric vehicles. And that's what I was going to be doing my graduate studies at Stanford on, is sort of advanced energy storage technology for electric vehicles, and are putting that on hold to start an internet company, because I figured like the technology of electric vehicles would advance and I could come back to it, which I did later. But the internet was which was going supernova at the time. And this is in 95. So I wanted to be part of building the internet, basically.
What was your first impression of the internet? Because I think for young people now, it's like the internet. It feels like the internet's always been there.
Yeah,
and I think people forget
the air you breathe or something.
Yeah, I think people forget I mean, even within my lifetime,
Yeah,
I remember when nobody had email addresses. I remember when
sure.
people were terrified to put their credit card details online, when
Yeah,
people thought selling books online was a dumb idea and this
yeah,
Amazon thing was never going to work. Like, that's all within my own lifetime.
right.
So stuff has changed very, very quickly. But what was your first impression of the internet, and how did you so quickly realize its potential?
Well, as we were talking about, I into computers from when I was even before I even had a computer. I was reading about them. So, um, so I had some like very early primitive computers, and then had a computer with a modem. So like dial into like a bulletin board or these various sort of very early pre-internet things, um, and and then like the you started to have the internet go beyond just universities and like a handful of universities and government institutions, to be kind of commercialized, and it was just growing exponentially. So I mean, the way I sort of visualized it was like the humanity was like acquiring a nervous system.
Mm.
So previously, information had to flow from one person to another. So you either had to meet in person, you had to call them on a phone, or somebody had to carry a letter by hand to someone else, and that was the way that information flowed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wanted to have access to a book, you'd have to go to a library, and the book, most of the libraries would only have a very small subset of the books that exist. So your access to information was very limited, and very slow. But as soon as you have the internet, where everyone's connected, now you could be in a very remote location, and if you've got access to the internet, you have access to all of humanity's information, everything. You have access to the entire kind of collective group mind. So it's like moving from like where we're communicating almost like by osmosis, like just like literally direct contact to, and very limited amount of information to now anyone has access to all of the world's information. I mean, the internet, you can learn anything on the internet for
crazy.
free. Yeah, I mean, all like the MIT lectures are on YouTube. You can become an expert in anything for free if you've got an internet connection.
Yes. And I think people haven't realized that yet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you ask them, they know it's true, but they don't quite appreciate that the equality of access to information is so radically better today than it was in the past. It's no comparison. I mean, for a long time, like books were very rare, and like people would have a small collection of books. Before the Gutenberg press, they'd have to literally copy out the book by hand. So having a book was like a relic.
Yes.
It was like hardly anyone had books, hardly anyone could read, and even those that had books didn't have very many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had the Gutenberg press thing, and now you can make copies of books, but still paper, still limited, still not that many. So we should be actually quite excited about the fact that there is this massive leveling of opportunity of access to information, because those that did have books in the old days would be, be like the lord of some, manor or something would have their library, but even that would be a pretty small library.
Mm-hmm.
And most people had no books. So now you have access to vastly more information than, the King of England did.
Yes.
Like even 100 years ago,
mm-hmm.
like even say 40 years ago. Like the average person right now has access to more information than the most powerful person on earth did in say 1980.
criticism. People don't like to tell people, hey, you're doing a good job. I want to encourage you. I want to uplift you. So I want to do that. And God bless you.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
All right. It was a pleasure.